welcome to the program today. The topic that we're talking about, look, it's been around for quite some time, but honestly, it's not getting any better. The housing crisis and the impact that that's having not just on individuals, but generations of families. What's got you thinking on this topic, John?
That's a great question. Well, my daughter got married a couple of weeks ago, and she's married an American boy,
Okay.
he's a fantastic young man for someone who's stolen my child from me. That's a whole therapy conversation for an hour, I'm sure. But look, he comes from small town America, and it's been interesting because his parents came over for the wedding and we got talking about housing and cost of living and they were shocked. I mean, shocked with a capital S
Yeah.
at what we were paying for everything in this country. Really horrified at what they were paying. And we were comparing notes. And they live in a home, it's a town of 5,500 people. It's kind of the middle of nowhere, but it's a lovely family home, valued at 105,000 US, which is, I think, is give or take 170, 180 grand New Zealand. And we looked at what their mortgage was, and their mortgage is a total a month, what most people are paying in rent for a week in this country. And it really concerned me looking at the difference and looking actually the difference at what the mortgage, the rental rates were on the property and where they come from. Indiana is the state.
Yeah.
When I started to do some numbers, it was really concerning, and because your daughter and son-in-law, you want to wish them well and put them on the right track, in terms of being sage and wise about these things and talking about saving, and it's the pennies that add up and all that kind of stuff. But I started doing some number crunching about average wages in this country, average cost of living, and it is frightening,
Yeah.
Andrew. And I, because I work with people, people's well-being, their mental and physical health is a concern to me. And I just wonder how many people are up at night pacing the floor based on what if something happens, if I get sick.
Yeah.
I had a heart attack a couple of years ago, which stopped me earning money for a considerable period of time. So I'm really concerned about where our country is going in terms of housing affordability. And I think, mate, there are some issues around morality, which is a very dodgy subject, I think, when it comes to finances. But I don't know if you remember, but when I was a kid, my father had friends who had some rental properties,
Yep.
or some families had a rental property, not multiple properties.
Yep.
But what I seem to remember is it was a 30-year investment. Someone said, let's invest in a real estate, piece of real estate for our retirement. But it seems like people are doing it now in a completely different method. They want to recoup every week, every month, a vast amount of the money they've invested in property. And that, of course, is putting pressure on rents and returns and so forth.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's dodgy saying it's a moral decision, but I have a feeling that when my father died out, who was born in 1920, by the way, be 105, just recently turned 105, if he was alive.
Yeah.
I think when his generation died out, there was a morality that died out, and I think it's to do with the village, with community, with understanding that we're in this for the long haul, not the short-term gain.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at these numbers and I'm feeling very, very nervous for young people.
Because honestly, you can look at it as a simple supply and demand situation. Oh, yeah, well, the price of housing is high because the demand for housing is higher than the supply. Yes, but is that demand coming from young couples wanting to buy their first home, or from property speculators wanting to add more to their portfolio and chasing that spiral of capital gains that they're not paying tax on?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of everything. I mean, I look at the practicalities of how much disposable income. When we say disposable income, but it's not really disposable.
No.
If you've got a savings plan, it's not disposable, right? It's how much can I put aside? And when you look at the average cost of rent, quality of homes that you're getting, and you say if I'm paying out, it's not uncommon to be paying for people to be paying, particularly in the Auckland market, $900 or $1,000 a week in rent.
Yep.
When you look at that, that is the entire net salary of a teacher. These are scary figures. So my concern is our young people, if they're paying rent, if they, we're lucky enough to be able to have our daughter and her husband in our home because that's, well, for now anyway.
Yeah.
see if that works out. But I mean, families do what they can to
Yeah,
help their kids out, but they've got to be able to save. The difference between paying rent and expenses and saving for a deposit on a home.
mm,
Well, the median price of a house in this country now is seven. I think it's $763,000.
yep, that's about right.
$152,000 deposit at 20%.
Mm.
Right. So in order to save that $150,000, you divide that into number of months and number of disposable, hours you've got in terms of income, and you're going to be 93 before you've saved that money.
Exactly, and hey, in particular, I mean that's the average across the country. If she wants to live in the part of the country she lives in at the moment, that's going to cost a lot more, and she'll be 105 like your dad would be. Of course, at this point, it looks very tempting to go, well, somebody's got an American passport, but as a dad, that's the last thing you want to see, right?
Yeah, yeah, totally. But I mean, practically speaking, really being pragmatic about it, we've said to them, look, you could pay off a home in the States
Yeah,
within a very short space of time if you put your head down and bum up.
yeah,
I said to them the other day, you've got to have money put aside in case there's emergencies in the family in the States.
hmm,
So I said, if you're saving $175 a week, that's $9,000 a year for a trip back to the US.
mm,
Right. I mean, it's the old economies, right? The little bits add up to be big bits. But I think if there's some hard saving, but you're talking about something at least four times the price in this country.
yes,
So it's they're babies.
yeah,
They're under 25. They're just kids,
mm,
right? In the bits, but they're just starting out on this journey. And I think think about yourself. If you had a mortgage-free home by the time you were 25, how much difference that would make to what you can do in your life.
yeah. But hey, even in your dad's day, that was very few people did that. You got a mortgage perhaps when you were 25, but you worked your whole life until you paid it off, right? It was that long-term goal that you're talking about.
Yeah, and there was a shift. My parents lived in Howick, a suburb of Auckland, for those who don't know where it is, in East Auckland, and they had a home which they sold in the late 70s for $44,000.
Okay.
A home only a couple of hundred meters from the beach, overlooking the Howick Beach, beautiful property, brick and tile, four-bedroom brick and tile home, $44,000. 18 months later, there was the spike in the property market, and that same property sold for 91,000.
Hmm.
And my parents had moved out of Auckland. They'd gone into some Christian service, and it actually excluded them from ever returning to Auckland
Yeah.
because that over doubling in price. And it just worries me that people don't have a choice to stay at home. What is this doing to our young people? What is this doing to our families?
Yeah.
I saw a quote from someone recently, which was just stunning, and it really impacted me. It was talking about the fact that we've been sold the lie that progress is really good for us. But in order to achieve progress, we sold the village.
Yeah.
He said, now the irony is we have to buy back the village. And what he was saying was you've got to buy back someone to mow your lawns, you buy
Yeah.
back someone to look after your kids in early childhood,
Hmm.
care. You buy back, take away food. We've sold the village and now we're having to buy it back, but
Mm.
piece by piece. And
Yeah.
I thought, what a stunning statement that is.
Yeah, that is a powerful metaphor indeed. And hey, I know for young couples starting off, but also an increasing number of older people when they retire, they don't have that nest egg, they don't have that mortgage-free house, and then you have people caught in the middle who've got elderly parents who are on rental accommodation with fixed income, young people trying to get a house, and it's tearing families asunder. Really, we have not just generation rent, but multi-generation rent, and the consequences of this on the fabric of society. Well, we wait and see, but it's not looking good, John.
No, and I think if we want to be sort of get a little spiritual about it, I think these are moments that we need to pray and seek God on for a nation. How can we move things, Lord? What can we do? My church is going to. There's part of a national movement. There's a conference in September for the church, and what the church has done is rented some big Airbnb houses.
Okay.
So they're saying, hey, when you register the conference, let's all come down and we can all share. 10, five couples can be in a big house and
Hmm.
and for a weekend and the rest of it. And I think we've got to start thinking those kinds of things in terms of the way that we share and leverage wealth. Um, a proverb says that God has given, and paraphrase, God has given the wealthy the ability to gain and accrue money.
Yeah.
It's a spiritual gift that God has given people. Now you could say, well, there are people on the earth who are not using that for kingdom purposes.
No. No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yep.
But the premise remains the same, is that God has given the ability, and I think we need to seek God. I'm not a prosperity gospel guy by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm a pragmatic guy. If I've got something that can help you, how can I leverage that? How can I use
And
that?
and John, maybe this is what you're talking about beforehand about buying back the village. Maybe this is the countercultural moment for church communities to say, hey, you know what? We are going to bring back the village, and you are welcome to be a part of our village. No mai haere mai, you don't need to buy back the village. Here is genuine community of people caring for each other, as it was back in the book of Acts. If we could find a way of sincerely replicating that in our communities, that would be truly transformational.
I think that's a smart thing. And I do remember when I was in my 20s, there was a church in Te Atatu, West Auckland, that had a property of a couple of acres, I think it was. And they built, I think, 10 little two-story chalet type houses,
Yeah,
which were $45,000 each. And the premise was that you bought into that property as a family, and you must sell that property, I think, at that fixed rate. So at the $45,000. Now, it was before things were accelerating at the rate
yeah,
they are
yeah,
these days. But what it meant was, instead of paying rent, you were getting the capital gain into this property. You were actually buying chunks of your own property and could pay it off. And then the benevolence was, I'm now going to pass it to you, Andrew, at the same price. And I've got this crazy idea that we have this housing stock in this country, the social housing stock. Why not offer that to young people at a low fixed rent? Or even if we were smart, say, hey, we're going to charge you $600 a week to rent this property, but we're taking 200 of that every week, and we're going to invest that for you and manage that.
yeah,
There's creative ways that we can do it, because your parents, my parents, and grandparents have paid through their taxes for these social housing
yeah.
properties. We own those; they belong to you and I. And when you look, I was taking a drive through West Auckland recently, and the amount of these, dare say, tenement blocks
Yeah.
that are being built. I mean, some of them are quite funky and nice, but they're building these kind of tenement blocks all over the place now,
Mm.
which means our housing stock now is telling me that more and more and more people can't afford to live in their own home.
Storage
So,
containers for people rather than that village, that community you're talking about. And
I
honestly,
mean,
I love your
yeah.
point, JP, that perhaps as a church community we can do better than this. We can show a different way of living. I mean, hey, not all Christian communities, particularly those with big gates on them or those that go under the label commune, have got great histories in terms of the church here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but I think we can do better and perhaps, in Jesus' name, be an example in this space. Thanks for the
Yep.
wisdom you bring. John, thanks for joining us.
No, my pleasure, mate. Always good to chat with you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.